Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for our free Healthy at Work webinar series. This one is titled Managing Your Money During Challenging Times. We are delighted to have Richard Haggins, Senior Education Facilitator at Credit Canada Debt Solutions, present to present today. I am John Beveridge, the Coordinator of Occupational Health and Safety at Windsor Regional Hospital and Chair of this Working Towards Wellness Committee. Jeff McEwen, Manager of Recreation Services at St. Clair College, will be moderating the webinar today. Thank you, Jeff. Okay, just a couple of standard housekeeping items. If you're having any audio issues, please check your the speakers on your end, the volume, and adjust as necessary. Questions. So if you have questions, you're welcome to enter them into the chat. But in a general sense, we will be entertaining those at the end of Richard's presentation. Okay. Anything that, if for some reason we don't get to all of the questions, then we will certainly figure out a way to get them answered and afterward. Okay. Following the webinar, we will provide a recording or a link to the recording of it, and along with a short survey that we appreciate if you could complete. It just helps us moving forward to keep the topics fresh and relevant. Okay. So at this point, I'm going to turn things over to Aaron Photo. He is a member of our committee, and he is going to present for us the land acknowledgement.
Thank you, John. So before we begin, I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge the land which we gather today. Although we're doing this virtually, most of us are coming from Windsor-Essex region. So this land is comprised of the traditional territories of the Three Fires Confederacy, made up of the Ojibwe, Odawa, and the Potawatomi nations, and the ancestral and unceded territory and waters of Caldwell First Nation, whose people are the original people of Pelee Island and Point Pelee. The Ojibwe, Odawa, and Potawatomi nations agreed to share this territory with the British Crown by way of the 1790 treaty, referred to as the McKee Purchase, or the Treaty of Detroit. This territory is the home of the Anishinaabe, who are represented by the Walpole Island First Nation, and the Lenape, who are represented by the Delaware Nation. I and the Working Towards Wellness Committee recognize the historical and present impacts of colonial violence on the Indigenous peoples of Canada. I identify as a settler on this land, and I acknowledge my commitment to the calls to action from the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada. We are privileged to gather here today on these lands and affirm a commitment to continue to learn from Indigenous knowledges and practices.
Thank you, Aaron. So without further ado, I would like to introduce our special guest, Richard Haggins. Richard is the Education Facilitator with Credit Canada Debt Solutions, a not-for-profit credit counseling service serving individuals and families experiencing personal financial difficulties since 1966. Richard has worked in the credit counseling industry since 2006 and has been working in the area of credit and debt education since 2007. As a workshop facilitator, he has presented hundreds of workshops to a wide variety of organizations, including businesses, governmental organizations, labor unions, and not-for-profit organizations serving the general public. Since the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic, he has overseen the transition of Credit Canada's educational efforts from in-person to virtual, and he is the main author of the educational materials used in webinars, which are intended to assist Canadian consumers in developing their own financial literacy. Prior to entering the field of credit counseling, Richard held positions in the fields of accountancy and education. He is a graduate of York University. I will now pass the virtual mic over to you, Richard. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Sorry for trying to jump in there a little bit early. And thank you very much to everybody for joining today, taking time out of your day to see what I have to say about the subject of managing money during challenging times. As was mentioned, I work for an organization called Credit Canada. Credit Canada was originally known as the Credit Counselling Service of Metropolitan Toronto. We are the oldest nonprofit credit counseling service in Canada. And as was stated, I work there in the education department, which means I get to talk to people about money issues. So here's where we're going to go to today. This is our agenda. We've got 3 elements to the agenda. The first part I'm calling managing money in tough times. And it is really a look at cash flow related issues, the money coming in, the money going out. That's basically it. I have a short middle section I'm calling dangerous credit. And so the world of credit is something we all live in the world of credit. It is the way things work in the 21st century. I just like to make people aware of certain organizations that I really suggest you steer clear of. We wrap things up with a section that really is taking a look at the subject of debt from the viewpoint of a credit counselor. So when we're looking at, okay, how do we help people resolve debt issues, debt problems? Okay, what sort of steps do we walk through there? And then we do open forum, any kind of questions, anything you might want to know about. Love to hear what you've got to say, your ideas, your questions, your comments. Anyway, so we got 3 parts to get through. Let's dive into part 1. Managing money in tough times. So I am not going to talk about how to go and build a budget. That's something that if you're looking for advice on that, there are plenty of websites out there that you can visit that will give you ideas, that will give you downloadables, suggesting apps or spreadsheets. So there's lots of ideas out there. What value I bring to the table to talking about dealing with the inflows and outflows of money. What I can do is I can share experiences that have been related by Credit Canada clients. The sort of things that people say that they will say to a credit counselor, I wish I'd been warned about this. I wish I'd known about this. If I'd seen that coming, I could have handled my finances differently. I could live my life differently. And anyway, so some of the observations that I've got to share here, again, are things that we've seen from our own clients. So you can see what I'm going to talk about here. I've got 3 elements I want to mention. First, what I'll call fixed expenses, then variable expenses, and then a couple of slides on the subject of actively saving, and then we're going to move on. So first off, what I call fixed expenses, I am not using the standard accounting definition of fixed. So if you got an accounting textbook, it says fixed are expenses that don't change. And that's all very nice if you're an accountant. But when I say fixed, what I want you to hear is it's expenses that are beyond your control, where some entity out there gets to dictate to you how much you will spend. And if you take a look at the bullet points on the slide there, you recognize it's pretty easy to identify who are the entities behind it. Your landlord tells you what the rent is. The mortgage provider tells you what the mortgage payment will be. The utility companies provide you with bills that tell you what you will pay. Insurance companies, likewise, loan companies, all the way down to your subscriptions, your memberships, your Netflix, your Disney Plus, your Good Life Fitness. And the reality is that for a typical Canadian in the 21st century, the majority of the money that you earn for the majority of years that you are an income earner are going to disappear in the area of the fixed expenses. So I've got one comment here. Let me bring that up there. The question of being overcommitted. This is one reason why we recommend that people have a budget or a spending plan or whatever you choose to call it, to have something there that helps you in guiding you to make appropriate decisions based on where you stand right now, what your income looks like, what your other expenses look like. So you're not actually signing something or getting yourself into a situation where your fixed expenses are absolutely dragging you down. Unfortunately, every credit counselor can tell you we've seen cases of people who they have an income level of here. I'm talking with my hands now. Income level is here, and the fixed expenses are here. You see the problem there? There's not enough left over to deal with the other things in life. Now, unfortunately, the fixed expenses, we're calling them fixed for a reason. There's not much you can do about a lot of these. You can't go back to your landlord and say, landlord, could you lower my rent, please? And, landlord's like, whoa, that's not happening. What we're going to suggest here with a fixed expense is at the very least, if you could pick around the edges and find things that can be changed. Now, on this slide here, I've got, you notice there's a comment there in the heading, hashtag Switch Week. So Switch Week was created a couple of years ago by the Competition Bureau of Canada. And they came up with it. They promoted it heavily for a year, promoted it less heavily for another year. And then they seem to have dropped the whole idea. They're like, oh, never mind. And I don't know if I'm the only person left who's still talking about Switch Week, but I'm quite happy to be talking about Switch Week. As you can see here, the recommendation that was come up with a couple of years ago was to take a look at switching whatever you could change. So on the slide here, we're mentioning phone plans, cable and internet plans, looking for insurance, different insurance providers, see if you could make any changes there, banking services. Again, we're not going to find a big pile of money, but there are plenty of people there who found that they changed from one provider they've got a bundle for their cable, their internet, their phone, their cell phone, whatever else. And they switch providers, and then they find they're able to put aside an extra, $100 a month. I mean, it's not exactly a king's ransom, but I mean, if you saw $100, blowing down the middle of your street, I mean, you'd run out of your house to go and grab it, right? I mean, like it's $100 is $100. You'd be pretty happy to find an extra $100. A lot of people would. Anyway, so that's the fixed area. Next observation here is the variables. So as I said, my definition of fixed is things that the world dictates how much you are going to pay. So you get, no option on that one. Variables are everything else. And I've got 5 bullet points here that cover some of the bigger areas: the food, the groceries, clothing, transportation, personal use products and services, entertainment, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So these are things that they range in importance from extremely important to things that, okay, well, I could do without. But the point here is that you've got some discretion, some level of discretion in all of these categories. That's what makes them variable. And so while I'm not going to go and dictate exactly what you should be doing with your money, but I will offer up 6 suggestions here. We're calling tips on curving spending. We've changed, slashing or axing or, chopping your spending down to curving your spending, kinder, gentler sort of phrasing. Anyway, our 6 ideas, I'll run through these pretty quickly. The venerable envelope method. Your grandparents knew about the envelope method. It's older than your grandparents. I assure you it's older than your great grandparents for a lot of you. And it is what it sounds like. It's an old school cash management method that still to this day still works for some people. You get yourself a bunch of envelopes and you write on the outside of the envelope, what is the money in that envelope dedicated for? And then you're going to try and make it last over a period of time. So it's basically a way of putting yourself on a financial budget. Just below that, I mentioned the reloadable cards. And the idea with this is that it's the same idea. It's the envelope method taken into, well, at least partway into the 21st century, with the type of gift cards, prepaid cards, the sort of things you see at the Shoppers Drug Mart or the gas station, your local convenience store, wherever you see these racks of cards. And, I've met plenty of people who've actually been using some of these cards in certain areas to essentially put themselves on a bit of a financial diet in just one particular area. So if that's something that works nicely for you, great and wonderful. The idea is to set a limit, try to live with that limit. Cooling off periods, I typically don't really get too much. I think people get where I'm going to with that. If you're looking at an item that's expensive above a certain dollar level, and you're going to say, okay, well, I'm going to give myself 24 hours, 48 hours, 7 days, whatever you decide to choose. And then you come back and get it if you still want it. Multiple budgets, my standard observation when I talk about multiple budgets, I use December as my go-to example. You can figure out why, right? There's still to this day, we get any credit counseling service, any bankruptcy trustee will tell you that we see this uptick in new client intake in January every year. If you visited a mall in the month of December, you know what I'm talking about. And the idea of multiple budgets is just recognize the times of the year for you that may be more appropriate for you to vary your budget to recognize things before they actually happen to you. The dollar sign equals number of hours worked it's a little psychological experiment you can play on yourself. And we're trying to get away from just what is the cost of things, but what is the cost to you in terms of the time that you spend? How many hours of your life are you devoting to a particular purchase? And so there's times where you look at it and you say, well, look, yeah, that's 40 hours of my life, but it's worth it. I really want it. And if that's the case, I mean, what you've done is you've indicated, you've detected what is for you a really higher a higher priority purpose for your money. And that's great. I mean, money is intended to be used. So use it on things that actually have value for you. So that's the idea of that there. The last point there, leave your cards at home, is an observation that comes from, again, some of us credit counselors have been around for a while. We've encountered people who just have too many pieces of plastic in their wallet. And so for some people, we're just recommending, okay, shed a few of those. Actually, a little digression here. Shortly before COVID, I was talking to a few of our more senior credit counselors, and I was looking for record stories. I was saying, what was your high watermark in terms of clients and most credit cards you've ever seen with one client? And one of the counselors told me she remembered a client who had 22 different credit cards. And okay, so that may be our organizational record. I still don't know how you get 22 credit cards, but apparently, at least for one person at one time, it was possible for somebody. And what's going through somebody's mind if you've got 17 credit cards and you're filling out an application for number 18? All I can say is one word: stop. Stop. Don't do it. Okay. A lot of people who live their lives quite nicely on one or two credit cards, be one of those people. I have a slide here I call choices to make. And this is really when we're taking a look at the variable areas, detecting what are the problem areas. I will leave that for you to decide for yourself what you define as a problem. Slashing non-essentials. Again, this is the need versus want conundrum there that I'll let people work out for themselves. And finally, there is a time to actually consider talking to somebody about the situation you're in. If you really can't figure out what to do, there are professionals out there who are out there to help. Now, okay, we've had a couple of bleary little bits here with the fixed expenses, the variable expenses. Let's move on here, pick things up a little bit. I want to talk about the term actively saving for just a second. There was a government survey done a few years ago, and the results came out slightly before COVID started, so the survey was forgotten. But they were looking at what constitutes financial well-being and how they defined financial well-being. And they found that one of the biggest contributors boiled down to two words, and those two words are actively saving. So this slide here is just indicating that if you want to feel like, you've got financial well-being, however you choose to define that, one thing you need to do is you need to figure out how you're going to take control of your money. And actively saving, this slide here, so I'm starting off with, it's all about one word, and the one word is automatic. A couple of bullet points here. The first one indicating set up an automatic transfer, moving money from your checking account over to a savings account or an investment account. And if you really can't countenance large chunks of money leaving all at once, well, then take a look at the incremental methods of saving, the rounding up of debit purchases to a specified amount or to the next dollar. So automation to achieve active saving. And one more comment in the world of active saving: windfalls. Taking a look at windfalls in your life. Now, windfalls can range from anything from a once in a lifetime your grandma passes and leaves you some money, or you win the lottery, maybe you're lucky, I don't know. But what I'm focusing on here is a couple of annual forms of windfalls. Bonuses for those who are lucky enough to work in occupations that pay decent bonuses, and for the rest of us, tax refunds. And as it says on the slide there, plan for them, divert them, get them out of your checking account, move them somewhere where they can do some good in the longer term, and hopefully it'll be able to keep you away from having to use high cost credit, things like payday loans. And now this is my transition from part one into part two. Moving along here, we've got a short middle section here I call dangerous credit. And I'm not going to give you a long lecture in this area. We will get through this fairly quickly, but I want to focus on what I call second tier financial lending organizations, and then finally to deal with the payday loan sector. So what we're going to do here is, rather than get a lecture, you're going to get a simulation. As it says on this slide here, the next slide up, we're going to be looking at some information I've taken from the website of a Toronto-based Canadian organization that offers loans. And I'm not going to give you the name of the organization. I don't want to ever give them any new customers. So I'm not going to tell you who they are, but I will tell you they are a legitimate, they are a real organization. And I even know where their head office is in North York. So anyway, I went to their website, and I'm actually using information I pulled off their website. So here we go. Let's take a look at this. Imagine all of us, we are about to go on this unnamed organization's website, and we're going to borrow $5,000. Ooh, $5,000 for all of us. And that part sounds pretty good. You know, summer's coming up, having $5,000 sitting in the bank account, that can't sound too bad. And when you go on the website, what you'll find is that when you're indicating you'll take the $5,000 loan, they're going to provide you with this remaining information here. The repayment will be $129 and change. The frequency is every 2 weeks. It's biweekly. The loan runs for 60 months. There's a couple of assumptions that organizations like this make. Number one, they assume that you're not curious enough to go and find out what the interest rate is. If you were actually on this organization's website and I said, let's go there, and I challenge you to find the indication as to where the interest rate is, you'd be looking at this really, really, really small print down the bottom. I can't even read it. And you'd find the interest rate there somewhere, and you'd be like, and the other thing they're assuming is that people forgot how to do math. So you take a look at this slide we have right now. You borrow $5,000. Here's your question. How much do you think you pay back? And before COVID came along, and I used to do this live in person, I used to say to people, without using a calculator, ballpark, if you borrow $5,000, how much do you think is fair to pay back? And people would say, well, you've got to pay some interest. So you borrow $5,000, you pay back $6,000, $7,000, $8,000. And I'd say actually about $17,000. So people go like, what? How did $5,000 turn into $17,000 interest? I've had people actually say they don't believe me. That's why on the slide here I show the math. But a lot of people, they just don't get 5,000 turns into 17,000. What exactly is the interest rate? So I didn't tell you that one yet. The interest rate on that particular loan is about 47% as an annual interest rate. And people will say, is that legal? It's like, yeah, it is legal. This is not the worst part yet. We got one more step to go, and that is to have a quick look at the subject of the payday loan. So I'm sure you've all, wherever you happen to live, I'm pretty sure all of you have seen at least a money mart, right? I mean, like they're everywhere. They're like everywhere. So you ever wonder what's going on there? Basically, this is what in Ontario law, this is what the math looks like. They are allowed to add on a 15% fee. So it's 15% on every dollar you borrow in a 2-week loan. So you borrow $100, okay, yeah, and 2 weeks later you pay back $115, right? So 100 plus the 15, 115. You borrow 200, well then, 200 you pay back, there's 200 plus $30 is 15%. This slide I borrowed from the Ontario government which is why it says up at the top there in very small, it says Ministry of Government and Consumer Services. Yeah, thank you very much, Ontario government. They're showing us the math on a $300 loan. Now, in the box towards the bottom, it mentions that if you were to do it, what they call one loan, that means that you borrow your 300, and then 2 weeks later, you got the money to pay them back. So you pay back the 300, plus you pay back the 45, and there we are, you're done. Okay, you one and done, and that's it. And if you're getting into payday loans, boy, you've really got to keep it one and done, because otherwise you get into this where you start using the money again and again and again. And that's what they're showing here is that, well, what happens if you do it twice? That what happens if instead of 2 weeks, you got to go for 4 weeks? Okay, well, now it's not 45, it's 90. You borrow 300, you pay back 390. You do it 4 times, you're up to 180 in fees, 6 times up to 270 in fees. And you wonder, how deeply could somebody get into debt if they're going through payday, if they're borrowing from payday loans? And I'm going to close this section out with one image, one slide. And this is a screenshot that I've taken off of the CBC. What's coming up is you'll see a photo in a second, a man named Robbie McCall. He was interviewed by the CBC. Robbie's story, he was quite low income and he needed to borrow $200. So he went to a payday loan place and it took him 9 years to get out of debt. So let's meet Robbie. And again, this story is still on the CBC's website. If you are curious, you go to www.cbc.ca. Use the search function, type in $200 payday loan, and you'll find Robbie. Notice how they got Robbie standing in front of a Money Mart sign. A little bit cruel, the Money Mart, but anyway, Robbie doesn't look very happy. You can understand if you look at the title, the heading there, how a $200 payday loan cost over $31,000. Well, that tells a bit of a story there. So all I can say is stay away from the payday loan people. And by the way, the storefront payday loan places are actually better than the online ones. The online ones can really, really be ferocious. And some of them, there are parts of the government right now that are trying to figure out how do you put these online payday lenders out of business, because they're really, really causing an awful lot of problems for people. Anyway, whether, we're talking about debt that is, super problematic like Robbie's or somewhat problematic, there's times where people want to know, okay, how do I resolve my debt problems? And we're finally reaching part 3, the last part. So we're going to get the questions fairly soon. But first, before we get to that, what we're going to do here is we're going to take a look at a range of options, and we're going to put on our credit counselor hats for a little bit. And I'm going to walk you through what would be going through a credit counselor's mind and what they would be explaining to people when they're dealing with debt issues. So let me first start, before I go on to the next slide here, I want to mention a couple things. So what we need to think about, first and foremost, we need to think about a client's cash flow, what they got coming in, what they got going out. We need to make sure that people have enough left over that they can cover all the necessities. And when I say necessities, I've often used the expression, the big 5. So your big 5, everybody needs, before you can think about anything else, everybody needs, number 1, you need shelter. You need a roof over your head. You pay the rent, keep the electricity on, you need that. Okay, shelter, that's number 1. Number 2 is food. Okay, we got to eat. Don't have to eat super fancy, but we have to eat. Number 3, we need clothing. Number 4, we need transportation. It's a big world. We got to move around somehow. And number 5 is the essential medical, dental, optical. Okay, so the big 5. We've got to cover that, because the big 5, if you don't have them, what happens if you don't have warm clothing in the winter? What happens if you don't have housing? What happens if you don't have food? Well, you're going to die, or it's going to seriously affect your health, right? So we got to cover the big 5. We need to make sure that people have the income to cut, that they've got the free cash flow to cover the big 5. So cash flow is our first concern. Then we need to take a look at people's current relationships with their financial organizations. We don't want to trash people's relationships with their bank. We don't want your bank to hate you if we could possibly help it. We want to make sure your credit history, your credit score looks good. And in the cases where the credit score has either already taken a hit or is going to take a hit, we want to look at trying to minimize the length of time that it's going to take to actually rebuild. So those are the things we're thinking about. We're thinking about your cash flow first. We're thinking about your current credit score and your current relationships with financial organizations. And we're looking at the future. Finally, we're looking at the future. And so when we're talking to clients, first thing we need to do is we need to go through a diagnosis. And your diagnosis, just like if you go to a doctor, if you went to a doctor and the doctor said, oh, here's some magic pills, I'll give you some magic pills. And you're like, wait a minute, I come to see you, doctor. I want you to check my pulse, check my blood pressure, send me off to the lab for some tests. You expect a diagnosis to be done. This is a financial diagnosis. We look at your income. Do you have an income? Is it an adequate income? Is it a stable income? We're looking at things like that. We look at your expenses. We want to know, do you have any kind of control over your expenses? Is there anything there that we can actually take a look at that we can counsel people on to make things better? What about your assets? Do we have any assets that could be used to clear up debt situations? And finally, we take a look at the debts themselves. We say, okay, well, what's the structure of the debts? What's the interest rate of the debts? What's the status of the debts? Are they still with the original creditors? Are they with collection agencies? Are they subject to lawsuits? We've got lots of questions we need to ask there. We need to find out what this is. As I said, like in medical terms, this is taking your blood pressure, your temperature, your pulse. This is the financial equivalent of that. And then finally, we need to know, okay, what do you look like in terms of how you appear to the financial world out there, your credit history or your credit score? And while I'm not going to get into lengthy explanation of that here, the image that I've got on the slide there should give you a pretty good idea. Credit scores range from 300 to 900. If you're above 700, and 80% of all credit scores are above 700. If you're above 700, the world of credit looks at you and says, oh, you're good. And it opens certain avenues for people to pursue. So anyway, let's take a walk through, and I'm going to walk you through what I consider to be from the least damaging options, the least harmful options, all the way down to you really don't want to go there if you don't have to. So we start off budget-based options. This is where we go back and we take a look at what's the income coming in? Could it be used better? What's going on with the expenses? Could we ratchet anything down? There's times where we'll take a look at people's situations and they're like, okay, you have the ability within your own hands to solve the financial problem. You've got an ability to work this thing out. It's going to affect people in the short term. And there's times where you say to people, look, you can't afford to keep spending money that way. I years ago, when I was still actively counseling, I had a client once who had an excellent 6-figure job. He was eating out in restaurants 7 nights a week. And like, I had to be the person to tell him, learn how to cook. Get yourself out of if you just do something about this horrific bill for food, it solves all your problems. He was like, oh, but I enjoy eating it. Yeah, I'm sure you do. Everybody else does. But sometimes reality check is what we do as credit counselors. Anyway, so there's the budget based. If we can solve things that way, it had no effect on people's credit, no requirement to go and rebuild things. It's basically they just take care of their own situation and life moves on. Next option is using assets. If people have something they could sell or sell is really what we're looking at here. And again, from my own counseling experience, I had a client once who I wound up telling him to sell his boat, use the money from his boat to pay off his debts, and go have a happy life. And he didn't want to sell his boat, but it just jumped out at me as like, this is the answer to all your financial problems. Also, if people are selling something that they're making payments on, just the fact that that's being taken out of their overall budget lightens up the budget, makes things more affordable for people. Again, assets may be an option for some people. Again, no credit report impact at all, no change on the credit score, no need to go and stress out your bankers or anything. So, okay, moving along here, what we have next, we get into talking about debts. Balance transfers, if we have an ability for people to move money off of higher interest rate products onto lower interest rate products and keep maintaining the same level of payments, well, then less is going to the interest, therefore more is going to the principal. They're digging themselves out of debt on their own. So it's not affecting their credit history at all, unless they have to go and apply for new products. But anyway, again, this is a relatively harmless way of getting people out of debt, if that exists. The next one is taking a look at mortgage refinancing and a HELOC, or a home equity line of credit. This applies for people who do own their own home and might be able to use accumulated equity in their home, trading that off for the ability to hammer down higher interest rate debt. So this is something that for a lot of people, I recommend, okay, this is a one-time thing. If you are, clearing off a whole bunch of different credit cards and throwing that onto a refinanced mortgage, old school purists like me, we want you to go and physically destroy the cards. Pair of scissors, chop, chop, chop. That way, you're not going to go back and go and do it all over again. So this is a one-time solution. But anyway, it solves the problem. It doesn't wreck your credit. So it's something that for some people, it is an option. And moving along here, next we get personal loans. This is getting out on a thin ice where people are going and borrowing money to go and pay off other debts. And boy, you've got to have a decent credit history for this one. You've got to look like you're still pretty safe. Otherwise, those, what I call the second tier lenders, you remember the 47% people, they would love to be able to lend you money to go and pay off your credit cards. But if I find somebody who's paying off a 20% credit card by taking a 40% loan, I think you can see how the math doesn't work on that one. So this one, we're getting out on thin ice there. And then before we get to what I call the hardship options, one more that people really don't even want to hear about is looking at friends and family to bail you out. And I've met plenty of people who say, oh, hell no. Like, I am not going to go to my mom and go and ask for it. But sometimes like, okay, well, I don't have a lot of good options from this point. Like everything from here on out is going to, it's going to take it out of your credit history. It's going to look ugly. And so what we have coming up here, we have what I'll call collectively the hardship options. I've got 3 of them coming up here. And these are put into play once we've gone through the non-hardship options, we've exhausted those, and we're at a point where it's like, okay, well, we need to preserve cash flow. And to be able to preserve cash flow, we need to find a way of clearing off the debts in a way that, there's limited funds to be able to, to clear these. So we are looking for what I call the hardship options. And these are cases where when the creditors find out that somebody's looking at a hardship option, they're going to be very unhappy because in my verbiage, the creditor is going to take a haircut. That what they want to know is how bad is that haircut going to be? So we have really the light, the medium, and the heavy for haircuts. The light is called a debt consolidation program. It is something that's done through a credit counseling service. And typically what's happening in a case like this is the client has gone to a credit counselor, has been counseled. It's been determined that a debt consolidation program would be applicable in this case. The credit counseling service approaches the creditors and says, look, here's what the situation looks like. Here's what the budget looks like. Here's what's affordable. What we could do is we can work something out where the interest is either reduced or completely zeroed out, and the principal gets paid over an extended period of time. That could be up to 4 to 5 years for things to actually get paid in full. Now, the benefit of this is that coming out of a DCP, the credit winds up being less damaged in the future than what's coming up next. So what we have coming up next, that was the light hardship program. The next one is the medium. That's called the consumer proposal. Once we're into a consumer proposal, we're at a point we're talking about proceedings under the Bankruptcy and Insolvency Act. So a licensed insolvency trustee is involved. And in this case, the haircut suffered by the creditors, they're losing all their interest. Interest is gone, and they're losing part of the principal. They're getting part of it back, and part of it is disappearing. And then we finally have the last one there is the the full bankruptcy. Again, a legal proceeding done by a licensed insolvency trustee. And this is something where, nope, none of the debt is being paid back because there simply isn't the money to pay these back. Now, at the very end here, I got one more thing I will mention, and this is, we're going to call this the do nothing option. The do nothing option applies in some cases where it isn't even worthwhile to do a bankruptcy. We're typically talking about people with very low levels of income, with no assets, no significant assets, no money in the bank. They're receiving, their income is coming from what are called public entitlements. These are sources of income that can't be seized, can't be touched. Social assistance, so Ontario Works, EI, old age, Canada Pension Plan, things that just, in some cases, it's just better for people to just say, okay, well, we're simply not even going to go through any proceeding. We're just simply going to let things sit. In cases like this, typically we're recommending to people stop answering your phone because you're going to have collectors calling for the next few years. Your credit is going to stay ugly forever. So it's something that preserving cash flow is more important than, and for very low income people, preserving cash flow is going to be always the number one consideration. And then everything else is just like, nah, yes, never mind, not going to get paid. Now, that has taken me through the presentation. I think a pretty decent time there. We left some time for questions. For anybody who would like to learn more about Credit Canada, our website is there, very easy to find, creditcanada.com. Anyway, so we'll take it over to, we've got questions, answers, discussion, anything you would like to know more about. I'm assuming somebody's going to take a look in the chat and let me know what we've got there. Oh, actually, before we get to that, let me just move over to the final slide here. I'm going to leave the final slide up for the remainder of the presentation, local resources. Once again, thank you very much for everybody who's attended. Thank you very much for inviting me in the first place to talk about, managing money during challenging times. So anyway, if we got any questions, let me know what the questions are.
Thank you very much, Richard. That was excellent and very informative. Learned a couple of things myself.
Oh, great. Excellent. Like to hear that.
Currently, I'm not seeing any questions in the chat, but one commented earlier on the envelope method, where you put your money in all your different jars or your envelope, and that works well for them for saving.
Yeah. If you may recall, the Gail Vaz Oxlade had, I'm not sure if anybody would remember her. She appeared on cable TV for quite some time, a couple of TV shows, and she used to really thrive on that variation of the envelope method, the glass jar that was like, okay, this is the amount of money you've got for whatever time period. And again, she was dealing with some really real problem cases there and trying to put them on a very, very, very strict budget. But yeah, whatever works nicely for you. If you're more of a tactile person, envelope method. And that's how some people have found it, actually, that it's the actual going through and pulling 10s and 20s out of an envelope. It starts to feel like real money, when you're like, and there's times where people are looking at a fistful of 20s. It's a lot different than holding a little plastic card that you can just go and tap and, everything is all paid for and you don't have to think about it. But when you're actually going 20, 40, 60, there's a point where you think, wait a minute, I don't want to spend all this money. They start picking your money back up again. So anyway.
Excellent. So our first question that came through is, are there any comparison percentages between brand name food items, as you showed on your slide, and no name versions?
Oh, I wouldn't even know where to start with that question in terms of percentages. I'm not a big fan of citing percentages because it seems like whenever I come up with a number, it changes. I think I'm going to leave that for people for your own homework. I think just to if you're wondering, okay. Yeah, again, and I source images. Sometimes I source my own images, and then other times I have a graphic artist go and source my images for me. So I can't really speak to the what you may actually see on the screen as far as the imagery is concerned.
Okay, thank you. The next question is, if you are financially stable, is there a recommended percentage amount of your income that you should be putting into savings?
It varies from where you are in life. I mean, like you think about over the ebbs and flows of life. Again, that's very difficult for me to come up with a percentage because honestly, if you've bought a home in recent years, you're starting a family, you've got a toddler and a newborn around, and you're buying diapers left, right, and center. There's times where it's like, boy, if you could hold on to anything at all, I think that maybe just even that incremental, like saving, tiny little bits of money is better than nothing. Again, it's the concept of actively saving. And then there's times later on in life where your mortgage is paid off, your kids have already left home. And you've got, retirement is coming up on you, and you got all these plans for retirement. I mean, there's times where you might be saying to people, if you could hang on to 1 or 2%, that would be fantastic. And there's other times where, it's like, pile the money up so you can get out of the workforce and go retire and play golf every day if you like golf. So I know that people in the industry love the 10% number. They say, oh, save 10%. But I think that's just kind of, it's a nice easy number to go and pick out. But I'm going to say take a look at your own circumstances and decide for yourself what's appropriate for you right now. The idea is that you should be at any point in your life should be thinking about, okay, is there anything that I could do? Again, this is the concept of actively saving. It's thinking about who's got the control here. You want to be in control.
Okay, thank you. The next one, for the fees for licensed insolvency trustees, can you comment on that for one of the participants?
Oh, I think, okay. They are stipulated in the Bankruptcy and Insolvency Act. Unfortunately, I haven't really kept current enough on just what's being allowed right now. So I am gonna dodge that one. If whoever's asking that, if you want to follow up with me on that, then I can check that one out, get a proper answer for you. But yeah, at this point, I can't really say for sure. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Richard. The next question, is it more important to put focus on paying off debt or putting it into savings, or should they be done equally?
That's a hard one. The purist in me is going to say get rid of the debt because debt's got a burden, and interest rates, rising interest rates. The purist in me says yeah, get rid of the debt wherever and whenever possible. But then again, this is going to be situational as well. When should people actually be prepared to have at least some emergency savings? And again, harkening back to my days as a counselor, I remember somebody who his car had broken down, so he had some emergency car repair expenses, and he'd referred at one point. He had said that it was unexpected car repair. Now he'd already mentioned to me his car was 10 years old, and I was thinking, okay, if you have a 10-year-old car, you know what you do? You get some money in the bank right now, because that thing is like, it's a ticking. I've driven a 10-year-old car. I know what I'm talking about. It's like you're just waiting every day. You get in the car and thinking, I hope you're going to work today. So sometimes it's like, okay, sometimes debt takes precedence. Sometimes the savings takes precedence. It is situational.
Okay. Last question on the list so far is talking about credit score. And is it possible, if it's too good, you're less likely to get a loan or a mortgage if you need one because they couldn't make money off of you? The bank couldn't make money off you. So should you miss a credit card payment to kind of stay in the yellow zone?
No.
No truth to that?
There is no such thing as a too good credit score. Speaking for myself, okay, I've obviously been doing this for quite some time. My own credit score it's plateaued between 840 and 850. So that's basically on 2 credit cards. I just sit there and it sort of like wobbles around a little bit. Doesn't go any higher, doesn't go any lower. I have 2 credit cards I use regularly, like on a daily basis, but then at the same time, I clear them off a couple times every month. So I never carry a balance. However, I'm still profitable. So somebody who's actually saying they can't make any money off of you, they may not make any money off of you directly. However, if you're using a credit card, somebody's paying merchant fees. You take your credit card down to the petrol can and you go buy yourself a tank full of gas. Petrocan doesn't get to keep all that money. They're sending about 1% of that back into whoever, Visa, MasterCard, whatever you happen to use. So they're making money off of you indirectly. That's why they provide the incentives for people to use credit cards. The points, the cash back, the different rewards. The idea there is that they're making money off of. Believe me, if they were not making any money off of you, they would drop you on the spot. They would just cancel everything and say, go away. No, the idea of missing a payment, somebody's offering up really, really bad advice there. So yeah, don't believe what you hear there.
Okay, thank you very much. I think that's all we have for questions so far, unless anybody else would like to type some into the chat.
Okay.
Looks like we're good.
Looks like that's everything. Thanks again, Richard. Very informative, timely subject. I think I can speak for most of us. At some point in our lives, we've faced some kind of strain, or some of the things that you talked about, we've probably thought about, may or may not be aware of, but it's nice to kind of put it all together and check in once in a while. This is certainly not something we should just look at once and then let it go. Like, we have to, continuously monitor our finances for sure. But anyway, thank you very much. Very informative. If there's no further questions or concerns, then I would encourage everyone to just keep an eye out for our next webinar, and have yourselves a great day.
Thanks a lot, everybody.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for inviting me.